Very good. My name is Bob Burr, and I'm the designated chairman for this event. The first order of business would be, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. So move. Support?
Support.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. The agenda has been approved. We need to approve the minutes of the last meeting. And these would be the amended minutes because we have to add the names of 2 people to the absentee list. So
To approve any necessary corrections.
Support.
it's been moved and supported. Thank you. All in favor of approving the previous meeting minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. They've been approved. Thank you. The meeting technology, Sarah will explain.
All right, thank you everybody for being here tonight. We did have some technological difficulties for the folks who joined us online at our last meeting. And so you notice all these snaking cords and some strange triangles on your table. These are microphones. The reason this is particularly relevant is these microphones are live and hot. So although you could lean over to your neighbor and whisper something and nobody else in the room might hear, people on Zoom could hear, and our Zoom meeting is being recorded. So if you have something you need to say to your neighbor, the recommendation would be to pass notes like middle school once again. We will have the microphones for the folks in the room so that everybody can hear the conversation in the room. However, if you're a particularly loud voiced person and you don't like the microphone and you feel that you can project so everyone in the room can hear you, then you should feel free. You do not need the microphone. That's that as far as technology goes.
Thank you. Clarification from our prior meeting. We give everyone 3 minutes in the question period. And we're not going to allow you to split the 3 minutes and say 1 minute here and then 10 minutes later say, I still have 2 minutes. I did it at the last meeting as a gift. And so now I'm going to resend that. The other thing is the questions this evening, when the NRC does their presentation, the questions will be limited to the NRC, and those questions will be made immediately following their presentation. We will also have a question and answer session at the end of the meeting, and any questions that pertain to the Voltaic operation, those will be submitted to us, and you can do it either verbally tonight or you can do it in writing or through email address. And then we will answer all of those at the next meeting in April as far as the Voltaic questions go. Basically, that is it, and we can start with Sarah, please. Oh, yeah.
Julie, if you hit the next slide, please. This is our effort to address questions that were made to the PCAP at previous meetings or in writing. We're addressing them now publicly. Julie, if you would hit the next slide. We were slated to have a couple of different people speaking to these matters, and they have all had matters come up, so they have been unable to attend. So I will be addressing all of these questions myself. Starting just with a topic, the clarification of procedures for absences. This is for members of the PCAP. We discussed at our last meeting the idea that 3 unexcused absences would lead to termination. That's 3 consecutive unexcused absences. We did not talk about how to get your absence allowed. So if you have something that you know is going to prevent you from coming to the meeting, you're sick, whatever, please send an email to palisades@marketvanburen.org. And we will mark your absence as being able to be approved by your chair as being excused. Any people who plan to not be able to attend, please let us know ahead of time. Next slide, Julie. We got a question submitted in writing to the Palisades email regarding covert public schools and a question of whether or not they would merge with South Haven Public Schools. Yolanda Brunt, who is the superintendent there, was unable to join us this evening, but she has provided a written response. Julie, if you would hit the next slide, please. And for folks who are perhaps curious about this, all of this presentation and the responses to the public comment will be available on the county website, our PCAP meeting page. But the response provided by Yolanda reads, although I appreciate the opportunity to allow public comment on this topic, I, as a school superintendent, do not have the power or authority to unilaterally make decisions regarding the merger of school districts. The law provides a process for merging school districts and requires board action in compliance with the Open Meeting Act. Pertaining to the tax bill situation and impact, please feel free to direct any concerns to the Covert School Board. It is worth noting that Ms. Brunt is a member of the PCAP, so typically she would be here, but she had other obligations. Julia, if you would hit the next slide, please. There were some questions also made to our panel about economic recovery efforts and what's been done currently and what's been done in the past to mitigate the loss of Palisades in our community. Zach Morris, Executive Director of Market Van Buren, had another obligation tonight, so he has provided me a written response. I will say it's in an email, not a text. Me reading off the phone makes it look like it was an afterthought, but Mr. Morris said, since Entergy announced their intentions to close the Palisades nuclear plant in December of 2016, Market Van Buren has taken a multi-pronged approach to mitigating the county's tax and employment losses. Additionally, the impact of the tax and employment losses are countywide and will impact libraries, public safety, education, roads, and ambulance services, among many other public services. Since 2016, Market Van Buren has supported the expansion of 11 companies and has helped start and attract another 10 companies to Van Buren County. This has resulted in 311 jobs being created and $62 million in new investment. These projects have been in multiple communities ranging from Bangor to Decatur and Lawton to South Haven. And that is Mr. Morris's response to the question of what is being done and what has been done to attract and mitigate the loss of Palisades in the community. Julia, if you would hit the next question, please. There was some general discussion at our last meeting regarding refueling contractors at the Palisades plant, their salaries, how many of them there were. In pursuing this matter, Entergy is currently unavailable to release the data regarding refueling contractors as the data contains business sensitive information. So at this time, that is all the information we're able to provide related to that question. Julia, the next slide, please. Lastly, we received many questions, comments, and concerns related to the decommissioning process, potential environmental impacts of the closure, the decommissioning process, issues regarding security, management of the site. We've summarized some of the questions here. These questions are not something that we as the PCAP have the capacity to ask, but that is why, or answer, but that is why we brought the NRC in tonight. They have received all of the questions we received publicly, and we'll be working to address those through their presentation this evening. If your questions are not addressed during the presentation, as Chairman Burr mentioned, you'll have an opportunity to ask those questions directly to the NRC later this evening. And with that, I believe we're in a position to move on to the presentation for the NRC.
Everyone. My name is Rex Edwards. I am a spent fuel and reactor decommissioning inspector in the NRC's Regional Library Office. Can you hear me okay? Way to turn this more? Okay. I'll restart. My name is Rex Edwards. I am a spent fuel and reactor decommissioning inspector in NRC's Region 3 office. This evening I'll be presenting on decommissioning oversight And specifically, I'll be focusing on the inspections that occur at a power reactor decommissioning facility at any country or any plant across the country here. I do have additional members from the Region 3 office in attendance with me here tonight. There are also several members from the NRC that are listening in virtually. I'll just introduce a few that are with me today. Dave Hills is the chief of the Materials Control and ISPC Decommissioning Branch. He is the chief that the team that I work for. And next to him is Mr. Alan Barker. He is my government liaison officer, and is really who I go to for any interactions, intergovernment, government relationships. So great to have him here. The presentation I have tonight is somewhat generic to decommissioning. Since Palisades has not entered decommissioning yet, there are some specifics that I don't have answers to. So I'll do my best to provide answers to what I can, but there will be some unknowns. So there's quite a lot of information that I've included in these slides. I don't plan to discuss everything that I've got there, but did want that information to be available for you to refer back to perhaps at the conclusion of this. I'm also going to use the term licensee probably frequently. In my discussion in this context, I'm simply referring to that as the entity that the NRC has licensed to own, operate, and decommission facility. Oh, there it goes. Just a little slow. All right. This is a map of the Region 3 area. Our office is located just outside of Chicago in Northeast Illinois. It's the red dot shown there. Also has shown just a list of the decommissioning plants in Region 3. We currently have 6, and their estimated location is in the blue dots. To give some structure to my presentation, I'll be discussing the definition of decommissioning, which establishes our focus, but also bounds our regulatory reach. So I always think it's important to keep this definition in mind. And given that definition, I'll mention how it fits in with the overall priorities in decommissioning. And next, I'll get into the decommissioning inspection program itself, specifically going over how we decide what inspections are performed. And I'll get into the specifics of that, inspection program documents, including a couple of procedures. As mentioned in the introduction, there were a few topics that I was specifically requested to talk about, shown here. That is environmental monitoring, transportation of radioactive material, and oversight of decommissioning trust funds. In discussing each of these inspections, I'll show you the inspection procedure itself. I'll follow up with the objectives of those inspections and then how we accomplish them through requirements. And then I'll give a couple of pictures of what it looks like in the field. A good portion of what we do is reviewing documents. Those don't make for great pictures. Our preference is to do in-field observations, actually watch the work that's occurring. So that's my hope today, is to show some of those activities. I'll briefly discuss the anticipated schedule. It is just that, it's anticipated. I don't know for certain what some of the future activities are going to hold. I have about 30 minutes to speak, and after that, I should have roughly 30 minutes or so for questions. All right, so here's the definition of decommissioning for the NRC's regulations. We know decommissioning is a broad term. It encompasses many priorities, many activities. This definition, as I mentioned, provides some bounds, and it focuses our requirements. Specifically, it states decommissioning is the process of safely removing a facility from service by reducing residual radioactivity to a level that permits unrestricted use or restricted use under certain conditions. There's two things that I want to highlight here. The first is that it must be done safely. And second, it must meet certain radiological standards. And in most cases, the objective is to achieve an unrestricted use, which is highlighted in A here, and that has been communicated to us, the intent for the Palisades site. This is the definition for unrestricted use. This is one of the questions that was proposed to us. We consider a site acceptable for unrestricted use if the remaining residual radioactivity does not exceed 25 milligram from all sources, including drinking water, and that radioactivity has been reduced to levels that are as low as is reasonably achievable. And for just context, dose is the measure of how much energy is deposited in the body of an individual from radiation, and the unit REM combines that energy with the medical effects of the radiation, as different types of radiation are more damaging than others to our bodies. There are many priorities in decommissioning, as I mentioned. The largest source of radiological risk that will remain on site at one of our power reactors in the United States is going to be the spent fuel. So we always keep focus on the safe storage of spent fuel in whatever state it's in. Independent spent fuel storage installation inspections will continue at Palisades for as long as that fuel remains on site. Those inspections are separate from decommissioning inspections, and that wasn't a focus of my presentation tonight, but of course I'm happy to answer questions related to those inspections after this. As for the other priorities I have shown on the slide, our program is going to assess each of these areas, and in no way should the importance of one priority be diminished from the other, but per the definition of decommissioning, the final objective is to accomplish radiological decommissioning. Again, per the definition. I recognize there's quite a lot of information on this slide. Its purpose is to illustrate the applicable oversight program and people responsible within the NRC for providing that oversight. To explain the picture, it's going to be challenging to see, but the center there, I'm going to step away from the microphone and just point out. Starting there is a box that says permanent shutdown. Once the plant is permanently shut down, there will be a delay. Shutdown and all fuel is removed from the reactor vessel. Once this is complete, the licensee will submit a notification to the NRC, certifying that all of that fuel has indeed been removed from the reactor vessel. Once that certification is made, combined with the past notice of their intent to permanently shut down, that modifies the license, and they're no longer authorized to place fuel back into the reactor vessel. And that's illustrated by that vertical red line in the middle of the screen there. Up to that point, oversight inspections have been part of the reactor oversight process at Palisades. That's the top left shown there as Inspection Manual Chapter IMC 2515. Inspections are carried out by resident inspectors that were assigned to the plant and supported by inspectors back in the NRC Region 3 office and others in the agency. After that certification is made, though, at that red line, the reactor oversight process stops, and my decommissioning inspection program then begins. And that's in the top right there, shown as Inspection Manual Chapter 2561. After the plant shuts down, the resident inspectors will still be on site for a period of time, and they'll perform decommissioning inspections under our program, and we'll be assisting them up to the point where they get reassigned to a different plant or job within the NRC. And once that happens, the resident inspection office at Palisades will close, and all future inspections and coordination activities will happen out of the NRC Regions 3 office. As of today, I'm the lead inspector for decommissioning inspections going forward, but I'm not the only one part of the team of inspectors that will continue on oversight at Palisades. A licensee is permitted up to 60 years to complete decommissioning following permanent shutdown. During that time, there are a few general categories that the site can fall into. This includes transition at the top, and that's really transition to decommissioning from an operating state, and it ends when a decommissioning strategy is entered. Those are two options two options that are shown here. They can transition into a safe storage condition or active decommissioning. In safe store, systems, programs, and personnel, the site are reduced, abandoned, or maybe even eliminated. And they only maintain what is necessary to ensure the safe storage of spent fuel, as well as support future radiological decommissioning. Active decommissioning is, as it sounds, that's the active act of performing radiological decommissioning with the end goal of unrestricted use. I didn't intend for you to be able to read this slide. It's simply a picture of our inspection manual chapter. That's inspection manual chapter 2561. It provides the overall framework for reactor decommissioning inspections. And I'd like to highlight there's an appendix in the back. It's shown on the right side of the screen. That directs us a minimum annual inspection effort for every decommissioning site. The categories of the site are shown in a row across the top of the document, and required procedures are identified by an estimate of hours for each given procedure. And in the next few slides, I'll go over this in more greater detail. Hopefully it'll be more clear. Again, this manual chapter does not include ISPC inspections, independent spectral storage inspections. Those are conducted by a separate inspection manual chapter, but they will continue for as long as fuel remains on site. This is a bit of a closer look, and on the top you can start to see hopefully some of the various categories. On the top row there, category 1, that's a post-operation transition phase. That's the phase that Palisades will enter into once they enter decommissioning. And then if you move to the right, you have various categories given whatever the state of the plant is that would fall into, and then we'll perform inspections for that category on an annual basis. I'll read a couple of them since I know it's probably difficult to see. Category 2 is an actively decommissioning site that has fuel and spent fuel pool. Category 3 is a decommissioning site with no fuel and spent fuel pool. Category 4 is a safe store site with fuel and a spent fuel pool. And category 5 is a safe store site with no fuel and spent fuel pool. And it goes on. At one point, Palisades is likely to fall into category 1, category 3, and category 5. And as conditions change, again, we will adjust our inspections based on what category they fall into. And on the left side there is the column of procedure numbers, and you can see as you go down a category and line it up with the procedures and estimate of hours there, and that's how we decide on an annual year roughly what inspections and effort will occur. This table shows what procedures are required for a plant that is going to transition to shutdown. Again, this is what Palisades will be transitioning to once it firmly shuts down. And also shown is the estimate of hours for each procedure. Just to highlight a couple of these, the first procedure there on top is 37801. That the inspectors are going to be looking at any design changes that are going to occur at the facility from when they're operating to when they're shutting down. Next procedure is 40801. That's a procedure where the inspectors look at the licensee's ability to identify problems and implement corrective actions for many of the problems that they may identify. Spent fuel pool safety is a 60801 procedure. That is associated with assessing the adequacy of all things related to the safe storage of fuel in a spent fuel pool. You can think of that as anything related to cooling, so pumps, heat exchangers, lineups of equipment to ensure that cooling. Power supplies associated with that, as well as any instrumentation associated with maintaining level, alarm set points, all are falling within the scope of that inspection. Fire protection is going to continue to be required at Palisades. There will be a fire protection program. We assess the effectiveness of that under 64704. 71801 is a procedure I'll talk about in detail tonight. I'll actually only talk about an aspect of it, and that's related to decommissioning funding assurance. But that is really our procedure where I'll say we keep our finger on the pulse. That's where we get status of what's happening at the site. 83750 is a procedure where we look at the licensee's ability to maintain safety of the radiation workers on site. And the last two procedures are similarly, I'm not going into greater detail. It's 84750 and 86750. And those have to do with waste treatment, fluid environmental monitoring, as well as storage and transportation of radioactive material. If you add all of that up, we have an average target of 372 to 577 hours of inspection planned per year at a site that's decommissioning. And that's an average. It gives us a starting point from where to plan from and resources from. Of course, we can adjust that up or down based on what's happening. Also not listed here is a list of discretionary procedures if conditions warrant for a reason. We have additional procedures that we can perform if we get warranted additional oversight. We're constantly assessing the inspections to perform at the site based on the risk significance of activities occurring. When plans change, then we adjust those plans. The planning starts during the annual inspection planning meeting, similar to what I've just described. We sit down with the tables and figure out what needs to be done. And then we maintain contact with the plan. We have periodic phone calls, teleconferences, meetings to learn what's going on, and then we'll go out and do inspections when the time is right. After learning about status and conditions and performance, we'll assess where we're at and then adjust our inspection plans as needed. Inspection results will continue to be reported similar to how they are currently reported. If you currently get Palisades NRC inspection reports, you'll continue to get them. We distribute them in the same manner that they currently are. They're all publicly available in our document management system. You can find them there. And we learned that maybe we need to share some instructions. So the Community Advisory Panel will provide some additional instructions from us on how to receive those. This first inspection procedure that I'll discuss today is 84750. It is regarding environmental monitoring inspections. Throughout operations and continuing into decommissioning, a site must monitor the environment for the radiological impacts from the plant. NRC's regulations require it, and these requirements are included in the license at Palisades. We're going to continue to assess the adequacy and implementation of the program using this procedure. One quick note at the bottom of the slide is a hyperlink. That'll take you to a list of all of our inspection procedures. These slides should be available on the Community Advisory Panel website. I recommend that as a great reference to find this information in the future. I find it much easier to sort through there than say our document management system. To give a little background on how our inspection procedures work, each inspection procedure has stated objectives. Here are the objectives for the effluent environmental monitoring procedure. For this procedure, the objective is to ensure release pathways are properly sampled, materials are adequately quantified, to ensure that the environmental monitoring is performed consistent with the limits. And lastly, we verify the licensee is implementing their groundwater protection program consistent with commitments. To accomplish objectives, we have inspection requirements in the procedure. Here are a few examples from the effluent environmental monitoring procedure. There's quite a few more if you go look at this. So I just have a small example of what we do here. Inspection requirements for effluent monitoring and environmental monitoring include walk downs of discharge pathways, verifying calibration and alarm set points for radiation monitors, and a review of the annual effluent and environmental monitoring reports. A quick note on that, annual submittals of those effluent and environmental monitoring reports will continue. They're issued every year, and you can retrieve them through our document management system. Stated, this is what it looks like. There's a few examples of what effluent environmental monitoring inspections consist of. The picture on the left is a groundwater monitoring well where a sample has been collected. And the picture on the right is a ventilation exhaust where an air sample is being collected. Whether it's a water sample, air sample, or a soil sample, inspectors will ensure that sample is collected properly with appropriate procedures, and then analyzed in a laboratory. We'll assess the results from that analysis. And we also maintain the capability to collect our own samples and send that to the Radiological and Environmental Science Laboratory at Iowa National Lab. And that capabilities exist within our team. Next procedure I have is 86750, and that's what we use to provide oversight of waste management, transportation of radioactive materials. In general, our inspection activities occur prior to a package of radioactive material leaving the site. However, if there were an issue discovered in transit or at its final destination, we work with our federal partners to discuss enforcement and compliance issues and resolve that together. These are the objectives for that procedure. In general, we're looking at the effectiveness of the program to process, handle, store, and transport radioactive materials. To accomplish the objectives, these are the requirements. Specifically, we'll look at the containers of radioactive material or the inventory of that material. We'll look at the systems used to process the waste, review qualifications and training of those individuals that are handling and preparing waste for any sort of transport. And finally, we will watch shipments. We'll be looking at how it's secured, we'll be looking at the overall radiological conditions of it, as well as the surveys that demonstrate compliance with those packages. Of course, ensure that all labels are applied appropriately with Department of Transportation requirements. This is just a couple of examples of what we'll be doing in the field. The inspector on top is performing just a general radiological survey of a container. The picture on the bottom is a shipment of steam generators that were sent to final disposal. And just in general, we find a lot of value in simply walking around the plant, seeing what activities are occurring, talking to the employees, and just looking at what's happening, what's being stored on site. It's during these general inspections, the information we gather is important for overall assessment of how they're performing, but also informs, of course, of additional areas we might want to look at, or potential impacts the work might have on things like decommissioning funding. Which brings me to the last procedure I'll discuss, and that's procedure 71801. This procedure is keeping us focused on what's current at the plans. I mentioned, I think of this as how we keep a finger on the pulse, if you will. But it also includes inspections related to decommissioning financial assurance. Here are the objectives for 71801, consistent with what I've shown before. The procedure has us evaluate briefly the activities occurring on site. Also has us document those activities on site, so you know what's happening, and as you'll see, so our decommissioning financial analysts also know what's happening. We also look at training qualifications of work groups across the site more broadly through this procedure. And the one I'm going to highlight tonight is how we use this procedure for decommissioning financial assurance. I use that term a couple of times. We were asking, what is decommissioning financial assurance? Simply put, about that. Decommissioning financial assurance is having reasonable assurance of sufficient funding for decommissioning throughout the life of a reactor facility. Put another way, it's assurance that there is reasonable likelihood that the money for decommissioning will be available when it's required. Here are a few inspection requirements related to decommissioning financial assurance. Inspectors play a role in assessing financial assurance, but we're not the only oversight provided. The determination whether reasonable assurance exists resides with our experts in the Financial Assessment Branch, Office of Nuclear Material Safety and Safeguards, and headquarters. The inspectors will work collaboratively with those financial experts, and we pass along information to them so that they can determine a holistic approach about what financial assurance looks like. Today, I'm focusing on the inspector's role, not the Financial Assessment Branch's role. Basic steps for an inspector to perform this inspection are first to become familiar with the decommissioning strategy and schedule. We then look at the progress completed to date, what remains, really any differences between what they proposed, what they've been doing, and what remains for the future. If we see changes, if we see significant change in schedules, plans, the scope of the work, that's when we start asking additional questions. We can find out those differences. You can find out those differences too by looking at the schedule that's been provided in the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. If there are significant changes to scope or cost, they are required to report that to us, as well as notify the state of Michigan. I think that's it for there. I'll discuss financial status here a little bit more on how we acquire that. So I'm going to go back. The last thing I want to discuss on this slide is that last bullet there on the financial allocation control process. The financial allocation control process is the licensee's programs, procedures, or collection of documents that explain how the licensee is going to assign costs. When it comes to this review, of course, the NRC is going to be mostly concerned with how costs are assigned to the decommissioning trust fund or spent fuel management funds. Once the plant enters decommissioning, The financial assessment branch will be performing this review for us, and then the inspectors are going to be maintaining awareness of any changes to this process, and then we would engage the financial assessment branch to help review any of those changes for significance. To illustrate a little bit more about how this works, how this coordinating effort works, this chart here is serving that purpose. Again, financial assessment branch provides overall assessment of whether or not there's adequate decommissioning funding. As stated in the chart here, they review the annual decommissioning funding status reports that we submitted every year at the end of March. You'll continue to be able to see those publicly available in our document management system. They are the ones who will do that initial review of financial allocation control process and how those costs are assigned. I'll talk a little bit more later about the spot check program, and they are our resource. When I have questions related to financial assurance, they're the experts. That's who I reach out to. Now, the inspectors, as I mentioned, provide a role in this overall assessment. So we're the ones in the field that see the work that's happening. So we monitor it, we assess it, are there changes from that, and we document that progress in an inspection report. So they have it. If they didn't hear it from us through other means, it's in our decommissioning inspection reports to take a look at. We're going to be looking for any changes in financial allocation control process, and just generally maintain awareness of changes or challenges that might impact decommissioning funding. What we're doing when we are inquiring about the licensee's financial status is we're applying our knowledge as inspectors, knowledge about decommissioning to any potential impacts it might have on cost. If we think there's a potential impact, then we reach out to our experts in the financial assessment branch. Then we have them assist with any questions we might have or compliance issues. To illustrate this, we know, for example, that removing soil and shipping that as waste is expensive. If we see that the volume of waste has increased significantly, let's say 20%, that might be reason why we would question whether or not there's a challenge to decommissioning funding. That's just a simple example of how we apply our knowledge of decommissioning to potential impacts on cost. Similarly, if the scope of work changes significantly, like a dismantlement of a reactor vessel, is suddenly the time associated with that is going to generally be significantly, say 20%. That we know has a potential cost impact. So we look back at the financial assessment branch for assistance to see whether or not that does have detrimental impact on financial assurance. There's additional examples provided here. Sometimes there always isn't a clear answer. We acknowledge that. So the last question I've got highlighted here becomes very important. And that question is, do any of the answers above affect safety? And if the answer is yes to any of those questions, the inspector is going to ask for help from the financial assessment branch and sort through those concerns. I mentioned the spot check, just very briefly, it was on a slide earlier. Spot check is a formal review of decommissioning finances, and that is performed by our financial assessment branch. It's only performed when certain criteria are met. A few items listed here are what would trigger that criteria and generate a spot check. These include suspected fraudulent activities, bankruptcy, a significant decline in trust fund balance, and a substantiated allegation related to financial assurance. An allegation is a declaration statement or assertion of impropriety or inadequacy associated with an NRC regulated activity. When we say something is substantiated, that means we found it to be true. So that would trigger a spot check. The next two slides contain a concise list of financial assurance requirements and oversight. The list was created through a financial assurance working group that issued a report in April 2020. The full report can be found in our Adams ML number provided at the bottom left. This is a nice, concise list of requirements that you can refer to. I'm not going to go through all these, but there are a few that I'd like to highlight. The first is the top bullet there. Basically, decommissioning, the cost of remaining decommissioning activities must be calculated and reported annually to the NRC. And of course, you'll be able to see that. This is in the decommissioning funding status reports. Also, once in decommissioning, perhaps a little different than when they're operating, If a shortfall is identified, additional funding assurance must be provided immediately, basically in that report to us. This just continues, again, provided this is referenced, and we tend to really read through all of these. How inspection procedure 71801 inspections look really depends on the activities occurring. As I previously stated, we find a lot of value in just simply walking around and observing what's happening, talking with the people, and assessing the work that's occurring. It's really during these inspections that we learn of additional areas we might want to consider, including potential impacts on decommissioning funding insurance. So what do we expect in the future of Palisades? It's a bit too early to know for certain. Shown here could change. Eventually, we'll all want to look for this in the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. Licensee will be required to officially provide that report and to the NRC as well as the state of Michigan. That has to be provided within 2 years of permanent shutdown. We do have a preliminary copy of that report. You'll find in that report, what you'll find is a general description of the plans for decommissioning, the schedule for it, associated costs, and whether or not impacts are bounded by existing environmental impact statements. In general, Palisades, we expect the plant to shut down by May 31st, 2022. There'll be a few week delay after that before fuel is removed from the reactor vessel, but on or around June 20th, we expect that fuel will be removed and a certification will be provided to the NRC. Roughly around July 1st, then we do expect the license to transfer. There'll be a bit of a delay between shutdown and when all fuel is likely to be put into an independent cement storage installation that's already on site. We think around summer of 2025 that will be complete. They communicated the intent to leave the plant into a safe storage condition, as I described previously, between 2025 and 2035. And starting around 2036, active dismantling of Palisades is expected to begin and go for about 5 years, at which point we expect final status surveys to begin or complete in 2041. Didn't go into the details of additional inspections, but there are a few that I'd like to highlight. One of them is verification surveys. We have the capability, as I mentioned, to collect our own samples, do our own surveys, and we do that as work is occurring in the field decommissioning. The information is very useful for us just to assess safety, general compliance, progress, and really determining whether or not more formal reviews need to be done for additional survey. Just a couple of examples. The leftmost picture, these are not pictures from Palisades, so just to be clear. But the leftmost picture, inspectors were performing a survey area, they found an elevated area, so they're looking into that area a little bit closer. In the middle picture is a sample that's been collected and it's going to be sent for their analysis. And in the rightmost picture, one of our inspectors is assessing the efficiency of a detector that's going to be used in a pipe. They're varying the heights of that detector in the pipe to determine whether or not it's adequate for its intended purpose. Those are verification surveys, just things that we can do, tools in our toolbox to this as adequacy. Now, at the conclusion of decommissioning, in areas of significant radiological impact, we might develop, or importance rather, I shouldn't say impact. We may develop and perform our own confirmatory surveys. As the name implies, we want to independently verify results or confirm results, not just trust them as a reward. We want to confirm them. At a power reactor site, these surveys are typically developed in collaboration with our Office of Nuclear Materials Safety and Safeguards experts in headquarters. And they're either carried out by regional inspectors like myself, or we contract through a separate entity, independent entity to perform them. The picture on the left is one of our contractors taking a concrete core sample from a foundation. And the picture on the right is a suspended counting system doing something similar, gathering data from a foundation wall after it had been reviewed. I know there will be many questions related to decommissioning and Palisades in particular. I've only briefly touched on decommissioning at Palisades. There's going to be additional opportunities to ask questions and for us to explain what's going on. Within 90 days of receiving the official post-shutdown decommissioning activities report, the NRC is required to have a public meeting in the vicinity of the plant. And ahead of that meeting, the NRC will hold a decommissioning webinar where we can further explain the decommissioning process and answer any questions that you might have. The webinar is typically scheduled a week or two ahead of the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report public meeting. The intent there is to inform as much as we can. So when you do your review of the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report, you have whatever necessary information you need to perform that review and provide comments to us. List of references that I mentioned during the presentation and something to look at afterwards. Sarah, I think turn it back to you for any questions.
Yes, so where this leaves us in our agenda, we're going to start with a discussion and question period reserved for members of the PCAP. And at the conclusion of that, we will transition into public comment and question from members of the public. We do have folks who are joining us online and virtually. We'll start by addressing the questions of people who are in the room. We'll take care of the questions here, and then we'll move to addressing the questions of the folks who are online. Julia is running the computer, and she'll unmute everybody so that they can speak to the room as a whole. Having said that, we do have a fairly large group in here, so I would ask members of the PCAP, anybody who would like to start by offering comment or question. We'll leave it up to your discretion whether we're using a microphone or whether you have a loud voice and you'd like to project, but we'll turn it over to the group here. Does anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make for the good of the cause or to Rex himself? Would you like the microphone?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Are there any perimeter air sampling monitors around the property that will pull, to make sure that nothing's migrating off site? Or is most air sampling on the equipment only?
Do I need to repeat the question, or I think you said there's microphones at the table, right?
Folks online should have been able to hear
Okay.
that. Yep.
All right, thanks for the question. That would fall within environmental monitoring, and the team would be required to assess the impacts that plant operations would have on the environment. And they currently have those air samplers. We would expect them to be continue in operation for a period of time after shutdown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under 71-801, gave an example of 20% threshold, and that might signal that there's a financial deficiency. Who pays? Is it the licensee immediately has to post a bond, put up cash? I mean, what's the process? Or can they say, no, NRC, you're full of beans? I don't think so. Is there some sort of process that you guys have to go through in order to make sure that there's enough money in?
Thanks. I understand the question is, what is adequate assurance if there were shortfalls? It's kind of what I take from that. There are many options. We don't necessarily dictate what option they choose, but we do assess whether or not it's adequate. And if it weren't adequate, we'll let them know. And then we have authority to take certain actions, including stopping decommissioning, placing the facility back in safe store to allow funds to grow till that time when there is adequate assurance. But it's up to the licensee to decide how they're going to demonstrate adequate assurance, and then we assess whether or not we think that's adequate or not. Finish your question.
Please.
Oh, I was just asking, the decommissioning trust fund, is that primarily for the plant itself? Or we obviously have outbuildings, training buildings and things like that. Does the licensee get to pretty much spend it however they want as long as they're on track? Or is that just, oh, that's only money for decommissioning the reactor and remediating the potentially contaminated area?
So that we generally or somewhat generically refer to a decommissioning trust fund, and within that fund is money set aside for different purposes. Call that a commingled fund, and I'm speaking this is often the case where we have a commingled fund that has been dedicated to different reasons, and that is the case of Palisades. So there's money set aside for radiological decommissioning, there's money set aside for spectral management, and then there's money set aside for restoration, restoring into the site they need. And what we're concerned with is making sure that the money for radiological decommissioning is provided in that fund, and that's what they're reporting to us is this is the money set aside for radiological decommissioning, and it meets minimum requirements to complete decommissioning. It provides adequate assurance that that funds meet the minimum requirements. That makes, to answer your question. Yes, ma'am.
Oh,
My
you
share
have
is
somebody
important.
else.
Yes,
Go ahead, if somebody was in front of me, go ahead. Okay, with all your set asides, this is Barbara Norman, Cobra Township. With all your set asides for these decommissioning funds to start off, do you feel, or does NRC feel that the decommissioning funds is adequate?
the question is whether or not Palisades has demonstrated adequate decommissioning financial insurance. And that's reported to us annually now, and they have demonstrated they need decommissioning financial insurance through their submittals to us.
So this waiting in this cool off period, and I know that's Voltaic, why is that so long? That has nothing to do with the decommissioning fund?
Well, we don't dictate the schedule that they choose to decommission. We give them bounds and how long they have to decommission. We've said you have 60 years to complete decommissioning from permanent shutdown, and then they decide what's best and what's the right way to go about it from both radiological safety, perhaps decommissioning funding. But they have 60 years there for some reasons. It does allow for radioactive decay of material. It also does allow for decommissioning funding to grow. So there's probably multiple reasons why they chose the strategy that we did. That isn't a decision made by us.
Okay, because you alluded in your earlier conversation that there was going to be this certain years of just being dormant.
Yes, ma'am.
So I was wondering if it could have anything to do with the funding itself, or would you be waiting for more funding to come in?
What you can look at that is in the detailed cost estimate. There's some more details there of how they've broken that down. You can also look at the annual submittals of how they're demonstrating decommissioning funding assurance. And oftentimes you'll see a period of just growth assumed, where they assume we limit their rate of return, I think, in credit to 2%. So they may include that little rate of return in there for a period of time to demonstrate decommissioning funding assurance, and we would find that acceptable.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So that's,
When I went online to check out Voltaic, I saw that the company comprised of two other companies, Madeline and CBI, Condition for Decommissioning International. And each one of them has their own specialty as far as the complete process of the decommission. I want to know, in the event there's an accident, who does the liability fall on? Because it looks like they can all point the fingers at each other where the responsibility falls on no one. So who does the liability really fall on, and who is the parent company?
Yes, sir. I think I understand the question, and I'll maybe answer with the NRC license an entity. The holder of that license is responsible. So if you have a copy of the license, it's detailed in that license who's ultimately responsible. So today it's Entergy. Beyond that, through license transfer, it's going to be who's on that license. That's ultimately who's responsible, including for decommissioning costs. So I answered your question.
Yes, I just want to know if this is an accident, who's liable to, who's responsible for the cleanup or the rectification of the accident.
Sure.
And all three of them said they specialize in certain things for the complete process. So if it falls under this jurisdiction or this company's jurisdiction, can they point the finger to somebody else and say, no, that didn't have anything to do with me, that falls to somebody? I just want to know if that's an out for the three companies involved.
Yes, sir. I understand the concern, and ultimately the NRC is going to hold the name on that license accountable. That's who we're going to hold responsible. Yes, sir.
Has there been a site assessment done for a groundwater or soil contamination? If not, who's responsible for delineating the extent of contamination and doing the ultimate remedial design of how to clean it up?
Yeah, so that is a step in decommissioning, and it is required to be provided to us for that site characterization. And that'll all be detailed in the license termination plan that's going to be developed over probably the next several years. It has to be submitted to the NRC for approval 2 years prior to when they want to terminate the license. In reality, it needs to be submitted much earlier than that. In that report, they'll have that historical site assessment, characterization of what is in the subsurface, how they're going to meet final radiological cleanup criteria, and any associated adjustments to cost and things to accomplish that. That again will be publicly available and approved by the NRC before we would terminate the license.
Are there any, besides the radiological, are there any other, federal standards as far as metal contamination, impact of groundwater from metals that's not radiological that, make it cesium, or any levels that, what are those levels? Is it in a outline like REPRA is for hazardous waste? Excuse me, is there federal standards besides, to the best of their ability?
There are federal standards. The NRC regulates radiological criteria. So everything outside of that falls within our federal partners or state.
So it would be REPRA?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, a radiological standard, I've looked at my other federal partners for the exact details associated with what's required.
So that would be either Eagle or the EPA as far as setting those standards?
That's right.
Okay.
In regards to, obviously, just a second, again, I have to say that I work with radiological standards, and then when it comes to those other requirements, I work with our federal partners to know what's needed in the states.
I just want to make a comment, Greg Gotham, Eagle. We do have a radiological program. We collect samples, we analyze them independently of both the plant and the NRC. So we have, we're looking at that stuff, and then Eagle will certainly, I can't speak for non-radiological people at Eagle, but we do have that capability as well.
Great, thank you. Yes, sir.
You got your graph out there till 2041. Hope I'm still here when that gets there. Who has responsibilities? That seems to be a lot of people asking the question. What's going to happen there and how soon can it happen? Does the NRC come in and say, okay, you can start camping here, you can do whatever, or at what, is there any other group that comes in to check that, or how's that done?
Well, whoever holds the license is the owner of that plant. So they're charged with ensuring they meet all regulatory requirements, all security requirements, all aspects of whatever it is related to an NRC license. They're charged with maintaining that responsibility for making it sure it's safe to the public, and then we provide oversight of it. The NRC license won't go away until we, the NRC, has determined that they've met the unrestricted use criteria and they no longer need to have a license. So I'm not sure I'm directly answering your question.
Oh, so the NRC has the final answer, basically, the permission.
Correct, but I do want to be clear that after they no longer have a license from us, they're still the owners of that property, and they have the rights as an owner to do things.
Right, to do whatever they want, but
Yeah,
at
after.
that point, there should be no problem going forward.
Correct.
One other question, how long does it take you to get the results from the samples? Air sample, water sample, how long does it take to get the results?
You know what, it depends on where we send it. If we're, taking our own field instruments, we might know right then and there. If we're sending it to another laboratory, it might be a couple of weeks. If we're collecting the sample and maybe we're assessing the lab on site, it could be real time, go right away. And we have ways of checking their equipment on site to make sure it's responding like we would expect and giving us real good data. So it really depends on what we decide to do with the samples after we collect it. Could be real time, could be a couple of weeks.
And I'm sorry.
Is there
One more. Being where I represent the community directly south of the power plant. So we have 200 property owners that are in one community called Palisades Park Country Club. If there are exceedances on your air monitoring, what's the procedure for notification? I mean, being a adjacent property owner, is there a public notification process, or being an adjacent property owner, is there a way to be notified of that? That's the biggest concern of the park members.
You know, if something were identified in that scenario, we would bring it to the attention of the licensee, and then there's reporting criteria that they would have to assess and whether or not it exceeds some reporting criteria. No matter what, if there were a release into the environment, the environmental monitoring program or the effluent release program would require, essentially documenting that, and it would be in the annual submittals that continue. But essentially, you have to step through the process, determine what is the significance, if you will, does it meet threshold for reporting before it would be reported.
But that process could take 90 to 120 days, I mean, or longer, until we as property owners and neighbors will have no idea.
Yeah, it's hard for me to
I
speculate
know.
on scenarios like that. Upon identification, we get it in the process, and then the outcome of that is going to be the end result, whether it's reported or not. You're not going to. Yes, sir.
Question, we are likely to have about 16 canisters remaining on the property there. How often would those canisters be inspected once the refueling of this decommissioning occurs?
So the dry gas storage canisters, there's going to be oversight provided by the license holder, and then the NRC is going to perform independent inspections. Our inspection program, separate from what I talked about today, requires us to do inspection of those that are loaded on a triennial frequency. So once in a triennial cycle, we would be out there doing inspections on those canisters. Yes, ma'am.
And that inspection continues as long as the dry storage is. They're never removed. Well, we don't know how it can be transported right now.
Yes, ma'am, you're correct. We don't have a plan for ultimate removal from the site. So as long as the fuel is stored on site, they're going to continue to have an NRC license, and we're going to continue to inspect them until it's not there anymore. Alan?
Yeah, I have a question, Rex. I want to do a little clarification there a little bit. If there's back to your question about releases, like if there's a declared emergency, unusual event, or whatever it is, that falls into the emergency preparedness program, which the state of Michigan and the county are all part of, and everything where licensing needs to notify within 15 minutes, county and state. And if you've ever heard about exercises that are performed at the licensing, that's the practice, those types of notifications and reporting and stuff. And then we would also be reported from a licensing standpoint. Now I know that that's in operating world, okay. And on the decommissioning side, so if there is an event, there needs to be identified report like Rex says, and that needs to be characterized. And some of the other federal families we have, depends on what it is. So we have the US EPA would help characterize that. So there's not a lack of reporting and immediacy to that based on some.
And that one alert you said, I assume then the alarms that go off tests twice a year in our community would probably go off.
If it's a declared emergency,
Yes.
and based on what has determined based on actions, protective action plans, that kind of stuff. But yeah, those sirens there are the ones that they use to test those to make sure, right?
Thank you. Sir, I was not thinking of emergency type.
Oh, that's fine. You answered what I was asking. So.
And Alan is absolutely right. There will continue to be an emergency program at Palisades. Again, as long as there's fuel on site, there'll be some sort of emergency plan approved by the NRC. It will change as risks change on site. What you've experienced in the past, the risks are going to diminish, and emergency plan requirements are going to be sized appropriately for the remaining risks.
One more quick question. As the footprint shrinks and as the cooled spent fuel rods go into the dry storage, will the security perimeter then, follow that and shrink from that standpoint? Because right now the whole property obviously is secure, but will that go back down?
Well, we won't dictate any changes to the security plan at the facility. Those requests or those changes would have to be at the decision of the owner of the licensee. They will still be owners of that property, so they have all the rights associated with being an owner there, controlling people on that property. Similar to the emergency plan, as I talked about, reduction in risk, as risk reduces, the security plan can be changed and modified commensurate with the remaining risks on site.
You know, I just add a little more to that. That's a tremendous great question, because in my world, sometimes, you know, when a plant gets decommissioned, people hear that, oh, now they're reducing emergency preparedness, they're doing this, they're doing that and stuff. You got to remember that our regulatory rules and oversight has established those license conditions. So anything that's modified from this standpoint going forward in decommission needs to be approved by the NRC. And we're going to apply our regulations that we have in place and stuff. And like what it says, the emergency plan preparedness will scale down based on risk. But that's our decision to make as a new regulatory commission for approval on that. They just can't go to a schedule and say, now we have it this way, let's reduce it. Those things take our approval to modify that regulatory oversight and those compliance to those regulations. So it's a very important nuance. So if you, as you hear things being changed or whatever stuff, always keep in mind stuff, you know, that if that's part of the regulatory oversight by the new regulatory commission, it takes our approval.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions from members of the PCAST or comments they'd like to make at this point? Yes, and if I may, we've had a couple comments online that some of our folks are soft-spoken, and because you are wearing a mask, I'm going to just shuffle over here so you don't have to jump so loud and I can give you the microphone.
I just want to know if you can tell us what the status is with Voltaic's application for the intermediate storage facilities in New Mexico.
I honestly, I don't know. I'm an inspector, I'm not party to that. I think you can contact our NRC's public affairs officer, they can probably provide you the latest. I'm getting my news, probably the same as you, just the news, I don't know the current stats.
Right, not seeing any others, I'm going to hand this microphone off to Chairman Burr as we. Oh, well, yeah, as we transition. Yep, we're just a little behind schedule, which is unusual. You should all know that meetings with Chairman Burr rarely run long. So we're glad to have this good discussion. Not hearing any more comments or questions from members of the PCAP, we are going to transition into the public comment period. As I mentioned before, we are going to start with members of the public who are here in the room. I will have you step up to the front of the room. We'll give you the microphone and you'll be able to ask your questions to the group. We'll ask you to introduce yourself and then provide your question or comment. And then for the folks who are online, after we finish with everybody in the room, we will transition over to you. So you will be heard, and we appreciate your patience waiting to have your questions answered. So with that said, does anybody here in the public care to make a comment or ask a question? We can start to form a queue, perhaps here, and we can hand the microphone off down through the line.
What the name? Yeah, Jack Live from Wawa. 2041, the goal is to have 25 milligrams as the goal that you're going to reach. Is that in the soil, the air, all samples?
Yes, sir. For achieving unrestricted use criteria.
For unrestricted use,
That's
yes.
correct. So 25 milligrams. Unrestricted would be from all sources,
Can you give some perspective? What's background radiation, natural?
Sure. So the NRC estimates approximately an average individual through day-to-day lives receives about 620 milligrams per year. Some of that's from natural and some of it's from man-made occurrences. So our threshold that we've determined safe for unrestricted use is 25 milligram. And there is an additional caveat there of it needs to be as low as is reasonably achievable.
Okay. And just a curiosity question, all the workers, are they wearing monitors, badges that gives them real-time feedback on their exposure?
Yes and no. When they enter into a radiological controlled area, they are monitoring themselves in real time, digital instrumentation, so they know. And that's part of our inspection program to assess the adequacy of that to ensure the workers are safe.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Kevin Camps. I'm radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And I'm also on the board of directors of Don't Waste Michigan, representing the Kalamazoo chapter. And yeah, I'll probably just take the whole 3 minutes because I remember there was a question last meeting where somebody took 20 seconds to ask the question, and that was what they got. They didn't get to speak anymore. So there was a slide put up early in the presentation about the questions from last time. I'd have to say my question was really cut short. My question was, how can the NRC license Voltaic to take over the Palisades site, given the corporate character of this company, including criminal activities like bribery? I would like to give some of my time right here to really taking issue with something that Mr. Edwards said about what the Decommissioning Trust Fund is intended for. And I think it's very telling that what he said was that the Decommissioning Trust Fund is for radiological decommissioning, it's for spent nuclear fuel management, and it's for site restoration. And the reason that those last two categories are not a part of the Decommissioning Trust Fund, or they're not supposed to be anyway, is shown by the fact that NRC has to grant exemptions and waivers when companies request expending Decommissioning Trust Fund money on those activities. And these are major requests that deeply deplete Decommissioning Trust Fund. And that's what's so alarming, because when the Decommissioning Trust Fund is gone, that's as much radiological cleanup as you're going to get. And I think it's just fair to say that Voltaic's plan, with NRC's blessing, we can already count on that, is to do as little cleanup at Palisades as they can get away with, and then walk away and stick all the money in their pocket. We're already seeing major requests by Voltaic for hundreds of millions of dollars from an already inadequate decommissioning trust fund at Palisades for spent nuclear fuel management. It's not supposed to be used for that. There's other funds for that. For site restoration, other places have lessons to be applied here. At Vermont Yankee, the company, North Star, a different decommissioning company, has asked NRC for permission to use the Decommissioning Trust Fund, also inadequate up there, to repay loans and to pay local taxes with. Every time you reduce the Decommissioning Trust Fund for unrelated activities, that's radioactive contamination, hazardous for a long time into the future, that's going to be left behind on this site and not be cleaned up. And it's outrageous. It's unacceptable.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see all of you here, PCAP. We've been waiting to talk with you. Glad to see you. And my name is Iris Potter. I'm with Michigan Safe Energy Future in Kalamazoo. I work with folks in Kalamazoo and all over Michigan for obviously a safe energy future. I'm going to make it quick because I have to rattle off my 3 questions really quick. So the first one is, can you tell us what the NRC requires to specifically be in place and used for radiation release detection and monitoring at Palisades during decommissioning? That's number 1. What's the specific? The other one is, what type of staff positions? Because it's hard for us to really know what type of staff positions and how many total might be on site during the initial decommissioning phase. And you mentioned shipping and transporting. I believe that's how you said it. I know that the plan for Palisades that Voltaic and Entergy submitted mentions this. But can you explain what might exactly be shipped and transported? And does this include by barge? Because as far as I remember reading, there could be potentially dredging done. And one of the reasons, the main reason that I have been worried about Palisades, and so I'm obviously concerned about decommissioning, is because I love Lake Michigan. We all do. There are Great Lakes. So any other disturbances to our lake and radiation and releases during this decommissioning process would not be good either. So I think that, we have an unsafe old plant closing, but we're now transitioning into something else that we really do have to watch. So I think you got those 3 questions, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks a lot.
Sarah, I'm not sure of the protocol here, but I'm allowed to respond, or if you'd like.
Please, yes, go ahead.
I don't want to take from time. I will say that there are additional opportunities to ask questions in the NRC, but if I could go back to Mr. Camps, thank you for your question. I completely understand the concerns. Anytime an NRC has an applicant before them, that applicant has to meet certain requisite criteria. They have to demonstrate the skill set, the knowledge, and the ability to possess a license, including providing fund insurance. In this case, an applicant was provided to us, and we found that they met those requirements. Regarding the trust fund, there are reasons to commingle the fund. There's some beneficial reasons. I do know what the regulations say, that if you want to make withdrawals from that fund, and it's been commingled, you need an exemption for it. There's a reason for that. However, in that commingled fund, they are still required to account for each of those independently so that we have assurance of adequate funding assurance for radiological decommissioning. If, again, there were any, if the NRC believed there was a challenge to that, we have the right to dictate what the site does. So that includes removing or revoking exemptions if we find that they're unable to demonstrate adequate funding assurance for us. Regarding, ma'am, I apologize, I didn't catch your name, but I do have your 3 questions. The specific release criteria, it's a long list to go through. They're in our regulations, 10 CFR Part 20 and 10 CFR Part 50 appendixes. Probably the best to point you to look at what the limits are is the annual report, the annual effluent report that Palisades currently submits and comes out every year. In there is an offsite dose calculation manual, and it specifies the values and what they're actually releasing. Every year it comes out, you can see the exact numbers. Hopefully that's helpful resource. Staffing positions, I'm generally aware. I've seen some preliminary org charts. I know essentially what they're planning. I don't have that information here, but I think that's been discussed at previous meetings. But we continue to talk about that. Shipping and transport, what they'll be transporting, we can assume it's going to be radioactive waste. The bulk of it, you actually can see the breakdown in the proposed shutdown, post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. You can see the breakdown of the waste they anticipate. It's primarily going to likely be Class A waste, so the lowest, if you will, of radioactive waste categories. How it will be transported is probably, it's too soon to know for sure. That's likely to be developed over the next couple of years in the waste management plan. I did read and acknowledge that they did make statements about potentially shipping waste to Lake Michigan. Whatever path that they choose, it has to meet federal requirements for Department of Transportation and NRC. So we'll be looking for that. That's subject to our inspections. I love Lake Michigan too. My drinking water comes from Lake Michigan, as does my family. So I share the same sentiments about the Great Lakes.
Hold button down here. All right, so that's what we're on. My name, okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
okay, you're not gonna help me.
But no, you've got it going.
My name
name is Lowell Tippett. I'm from South Haven Township. And I got the 10,000-pound elephant question. And that's a two-parter. Number one, from the time the energy shuts down till that reactor is empty, do you have an estimated cost of what that amount of money is? And the second question related to that is your little graphs and all that, so you can alter the funding here and there. If they start doing an overrun, where is this money coming from? That's my two questions.
So, thank you, sir, for your questions. If I understood you correctly, sir, the first question was, what is their estimate for decommissioning cost? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
How, when I shut down, run. So I'm at the reactor.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I think they.
Okay, let me straight. This is very simple. They shut down the reactor. And then at a certain time later on, that reactor, all the fuel may take out, right? Well, all right, let's read it frankly. When the time energy shuts that reactor down, so the time that reactor is, the spent fuel is taken out, what is the estimated cost of that?
And it's certain, let me explain maybe why I have some confusion, because the time from when they shut down and when they remove fuel is a pretty small window. It's about 3 weeks. So I think what you're asking is, how much money is it going to take to complete decommissioning?
No, how much money is it gonna take to take and empty that reactor and put that fuel in a safe storage tank?
I don't have that answer, sir. That again, that's a 3-week, very specific time frame. I don't have a breakdown of cost for that roughly.
You don't have a second question either. If there's a financial shortfall for the people doing the work, where's that funds gonna come from?
I do have the answer to that. They're required to report to us every year they're required to report to us the status of their decommissioning trust fund. And they have to meet a minimum requirement. If they don't meet that minimum requirement, they're required to tell us how they're going to make up that shortfall. And similar to other responses, I can't speculate. There's many options that they could choose from to demonstrate that they made up that shortfall. So I don't know, I don't have an answer for you as how they're going to do it, but they have options available if they do it. Ultimately, the NRC is going to decide whether or not that option is acceptable. And if it's not, we're gonna explain that to them and work until they do have an acceptable answer.
So basically, there's a shortfall, they can't complete the project. You're gonna have to stop the project, right?
No, sir, that would be speculating on what the issues are. But again, they need to tell us how they're going to solve the problem. If we find it unacceptable, we can take certain actions, including directing them to go back in a safe store. We can revoke exemptions. We've got many options that we can pursue. It would be contingent upon what the circumstances are.
Do we have any other additional questions or comments from members of the public? Here in the room, I'm not seeing any at this time. Or I suppose I should answer 3 times, ask 3 times technically. Any questions from the public? Any questions from the public in the room? Any questions from the public in the room? Hearing none, we will move on to folks who are online. Julia is going to begin to unmute folks. We'll ask that when you receive the prompt on your screen to unmute yourself, that you introduce yourself with your name, organizational association if that's appropriate, and then the floor will be yours. Julia, what is the name of the first person you're going to unmute? Michael Lukigan. All right, sir, the floor should be yours. Yeah, can you speak one more time? Julia, is he unmuted? We had you for just a moment and then you cut out. No, that's okay.
Hello?
Yes, we've got you here.
Okay, I'm getting a bit of an echo. Thank you. Michael Keegan from Don't Waste Michigan. We've been tracking Palisades for 40 years. We were legal interveners back in the early 90s, along with the Attorney General of the state of Michigan, Frank Kelly, contesting the dry cask storage. The ability to be unloaded, the ability to be transported. We tried to get a temporary restraining order because we believe that the casks could not be unloaded and could not be transported if there was a problem. We were stonewalled and we tried to get the TRO on one day. The next day, the utility created the document which essentially reversed the loading process and declared that that was their demonstration that it was not irreparable harm, that it could be undone. Lo and behold, it cannot be undone. We all want to get to the happy ending. I wish the folks along the shore of Lake Michigan well, and the area well. But in order to get to that happy ending, there needs to be a regulator that regulates. There needs to be a party taking over Voltaic, which is a credible entity. The NRC is not up to regulation. They've demonstrated to the public time and time again. And Voltaic is cutting corners. The citizens of the area have absolutely nothing if they do not have independent, real-time radiological monitoring, which is reported directly to them. I have visited over the decades Palisades Park and have lectured there on a number of occasions. Those folks need to have independent monitoring systems. So I do have a couple questions that you can answer once I'm up with my time. I appreciate the time clock. When will the Don't Waste Michigan, Beyond Nuclear, and Michigan's Safe Energy Futures, along with the Attorney General of the state of Michigan and the Environmental Policy Law Center, be granted the hearing, the public hearing that they have requested? They made a 20-day window timeline to comply, and we have not been heard back. We are being stiff-armed on the question of the shipment of high-level nuclear waste on Lake Michigan. So we have a concern there. So with that, also I need to know about the Price-Anderson coverage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With that, Julia, I believe we'll turn it over to Rex here. Do you have those questions?
I'm aware of a hearing. I think Mr. Keegan, thank you for your questions. I'm not party to those. It's before the commission. I think you have to refer to our public affairs office at the NRC for further information regarding that. Similarly, regarding Price-Anderson, I'm an inspector. Those would not be areas that I would generally deal with. I would work with my government liaison officer and public affairs to provide additional questions. I'm not sure if there's a specific question there, but perhaps that can be provided to the Palisades Community Advisory Panel, and then we can work together on that's the best I can say of it.
Thank you for that, Rex. And yes, this holds true for everyone in the room and online. If you ask a question and you didn't quite get the answer you want, or you'd like more information, please send a follow-up question to palisades@marketvanburen.org. And we will be compiling these questions and sharing them again with the NRC. To Mr. Camp's comment earlier, we are providing comments in full to members of the PCAP and the parties that answer the questions. We just are not putting all of the language up necessarily on the slides here. Public comments are available online as well in their entirety. With that, Julia, would you unmute our next person?
So Michael, now we're muting you. And does anyone else from online have a question?
If I may, while waiting, sorry.
Could you step forward for the mic just a
Yeah, absolutely. Is that better?
Yes.
So while waiting, I was reminded that, you know, I'm an inspector, so a lot of the questions you have, I'm gonna say those are great questions, and I'm gonna reach out to the individuals that I partner with to figure out answers. So the gentleman that asked some questions about funding assurance, you know, I'm gonna be the one asking those questions, and I go to the experts in the financial assessment branch to assess adequacy. It's not gonna be me, it's gonna be a team of folks that work together to find out answers. So it should be.
All right, thank you. Ryan Pickering would like to ask our next question.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My name is Ryan Pickering. On February 16th, 2022, I was quoted by the local newspaper, the Herald Palladium, speaking in favor of keeping Palisades nuclear plant open. I want to remind everyone that nuclear energy is proven to be the safest way to generate electricity. This is based on a recent study from Our World in Data. I want to commend those who have worked at Palisades over the years. Thank you for making clean energy for all Michiganders. My question, has the NRC performed an environmental impact report regarding the increase in pollution for Michiganders or the public at large caused by decommissioning a functional nuclear fission thermal power plant? Once again, has the NRC performed an environmental impact regarding the increase in pollution caused by decommissioning a functional nuclear fission thermal power plant? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for your question. We'll turn that over to you, Rex.
Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate the questions figuring out. Again, I'm a decommissioning inspector. I work in decommissioning to assess compliance with decommissioning. I think your question is probably better directed to the NRC's Public Affairs Office. And,
All right, thank you, Ryan. We will now mute you. And now we have a question from Isuru Sen, and we're going to allow you to talk.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for allowing me to speak here. My name is Isuru Sen. I'm calling from Climate Coalition from New York. My children are 7 and 11 years old. And the Palisades nuclear plant, we've done the numbers to find that it's one of the largest sources of carbon-free energy in the world, but also specifically Michigan. I guess a follow-up to the previous question, has either the NRC or the county or the state conducted a economic, environmental, or human health benefits generated by Palisades, and what that would mean if this plant operated for another 9 years as per NRC's licensed period. If I may have a follow-up question, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that just passed in the Congress, US Congress provisioned $6 billion in the Civilian Nuclear Credit Program to prevent the premature retirement of existing zero carbon nuclear plants. Would you recommend these funds be unlocked to realize the above mentioned benefits? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Rex, may I turn it back over to you?
Yes, thanks, Sarah, and sir, thank you for your question and your comments. Again, I'm not in a position to comment on those. That's just not something I'm party to. But I would direct you to the NRC's Public Affairs Office as a resource where you can propose those questions and comments.
All right, now we have a question from Brian Campbell.
Yes, Brian Campbell. I really just want to echo my other fellow nuclear pro-nuclear advocates in that the Palisades plants is really a disaster if we close it. We are facing in this country a war with a dictator who's invaded Ukraine, and that affects our energy, and it's all about energy. And to close down a non-emitting carbon source as Palisades Nuclear, which can be operated until 2031, is just pure insanity. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. Thank you.
For that comment. I don't believe I heard a question in there. Rex, is there anything you'd care to address? Okay. Julia, if you would move on to the next person with their hand raised.
Any more questions? I'm not seeing any raised hands online.
All right, then we will do the same. We'll make 3 requests. If anybody online has a question, please raise your hand. Do we have any questions? Do we have any questions? We have one question. Okay.
Michael again.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. Well, it came up on one of these previous commenters. Could the NRC speak to the temporary weld that's in place now that was authorized for 21.7 months of operation and already 18 months deep on that 21 months on that run? So will that weld be repaired, inspected? Because Palisades is scheduled to shut down on May 31st. There's a weld that's going to expire about June 30th. Could you speak to that? It's on the reactor head, on the penetration weld. Could you speak to the embrittlement of the reactor? Could you speak to some of the issues that were raised in the advocacy for running the plant longer? Thank you.
Rex, we'll turn it over to you.
Ms. Keegan, thank you for your question and comment. I believe your question has to do with the current operation of the plant. I'm associated with decommissioning inspections after the plant shuts down. There will be opportunities for you to ask your question. They're at a better forum than this. We will have an annual public meeting to discuss performance at the Palisades plant. That's likely to occur sometime before the plant shuts down. And at that point, you can ask the NRC inspectors that perform operating inspections that specific question. That would be the best opportunity, I think, for you to engage with the NRC and inspectors that are currently providing oversight.
Thank you. That's what I'm seeking. What I'm seeking is an autopsy of the embrittlement at Palisades, which would help the industry tremendously in knowing just how bad it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keegan. With that, Julia, assuming we don't have any other hands raised, we are going to close the public comment period for the NRC. And we're going to move through our agenda here. Mr. Edwards, thank you for your time. And Julia, if you would move on to the next PowerPoint slide. We are going to transition into an update from the Economic Growth Institute, EGI, at the University of Michigan. Julia, if you would please promote Carmen Wells as well as Sarah Crane to be panelists. They are going to speak to this group. At that same time, you can stop screen sharing and we'll allow them to share their screens if they deem that appropriate. Excellent. Carmen, we can see you on the screen here. Are we awaiting Sarah as well? And then we see Sarah coming in as well. Excellent. All right, ladies, the floor is yours as you choose to use it.
Thank you. Sarah, just so I know, shall I be sharing my screen or is our submission on the screen in the room?
The submission is available online, but we do not have it on the screen. So if you could share your screen, please.
I will do that.
Thank you.
Hopefully everybody can see that. Good evening. I'm pleased to join today's meeting. My name is Carmen Wells Quigg, and I'm here with my colleague, Research Manager Sarah Crane, and we are from the Economic Growth Institute at the University of Michigan. For those of you who joined last month's meeting, I was also there present in the room. Today we're joining virtually, and we hope to be back in person at next month's meeting. So we're joining tonight's meeting to provide an update on the economic impact analysis phase of the Palisades Economic Recovery Initiative. Today we're sharing data for the economic modeling and an explanation of the modeling process we are engaging with as we collaborate with Connexus Group. So as a reminder, the economic impact analysis will measure the impact on the local industries and taxes, and that measurement of impact will in turn inform the development of the recovery strategy, and where the initiative will also recommend prioritization of resources in the future. So as a reminder, our overall goal is the development of a comprehensive strategy to mitigate the economic impact of the closure of the Palisades plant. So I'm going to turn things over to my colleague Sarah Crane right now to give our presentation for today's meeting.
Thank you, Carmen. So what was included in your meeting packet for today is just kind of a brief overview of what modeling software we're going to be using. So part of economic impact modeling is there's multiple softwares, and through working with Connexus Group, we're going to use 2 different modeling softwares to make sure that we can validate the results. So we're going to be using IMPLAN and EMSI, and both of these are input-output analyses, where essentially we're telling the models, like, here's what's changing within the economy, and then the models are telling us what are the ripple effects from that. So we are going to be looking at 3 different levels of impact. We're going to look at direct, that's what's happening as Palisades is closing. We're going to be looking at indirect, which is the business-to-business supply chain impacts. And then we're also going to be looking at induced. Induced impacts are those that are related to the employees' wages. So as the employees are no longer there in the community, what are those types of impacts that ripple throughout the economy? And so we're going to be looking at this in 2 different locations. First, we're going to do just Van Buren County to understand what kind of those concentrated impacts are. And then we're also going to do the Tri-County region area of Van Buren, Cass, and Berrien. So to run these models, we have to have information to input initially. And so we got information from Entergy about current employees and wages and kind of what that looks like. So right now, Entergy let us know that there are 594 current employees. With the first stage of the decommissioning in 2022, that's when 334 employees will be let go. And then in 2025 is when the remaining 260 will be let go. And then from there, we also asked them about wages and benefits. They were able to provide a general wages for these 594 employees. And then we just broke that into, what's the wages impact, the wages that are lost in 2022, and what are the wages that are lost in 2025. As Sarah referenced at the beginning of this meeting, we did wonder if we could model the impact of the refueling contractors that come into the area. However, we are unable to secure that specific data needed. Unfortunately, the model does require that we have some level of specificity about these contractors to be able to give us an accurate representation of how this ripples throughout the economy. So we're coming today to make sure that if there's other data that this group has access to that you can provide to us that we can use as part of the modeling, we are very interested in that. We want to make sure to take all things possible into account, but we definitely need data to support that. So definitely looking for feedback or input as you have other things that might need to be considered. So that's what we're here for today, is to just hear your comments with that. Our next steps is, once we have presented this to you all and gotten your feedback, we're going to do the modeling. And then in April, we will return to you all and present our draft findings. And so again, this is part of the analysis phase. And so we just want to share along the way where we're at and what we're finding. And that will inform the recovery initiative planning that Carmen referenced earlier. So that's the brief overview of where we are. Thank you so much. And Carmen, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Sarah. So as Sarah's alluded to, the next step in our analysis phase will be completing the data collection. So her call out for any additional data would be greatly appreciated. We have heard from some folks who have been involved in the recovery initiative. So thank you for that. We're going to be collecting all of that, which includes the direct, indirect, and induced impacts. And that means really not only impacts to the supply chain due to the plant closing, but also impacts related to how employees spend their money and what is lost because the employees will no longer be spending their dollars locally. So we will be presenting back at the April 13th meeting, as Sarah said, and we will welcome any public comments even at that time as we roll our analysis into the final draft document of this phase, which we will share at the May meeting. After that date, our team will move into our assessment phase of the project. That's where we were going to take what we've learned from the analysis phase, take the public comments and any additional data that has been given to us, and we will create a comprehensive assessment of the system, sectors, and assets that we've been able to collect and identify and analyze and advance that into the recovery initiative. So just giving you a little bit of a sense of our timeline here, as well as the different phases to our approach for the initiative. Lastly, after that takes place, the team will create a recovery strategy, which will include a prioritized response of resources, actions, and recommendations for the region to inform the recovery initiative in its planning. That and concludes our presentation for today. I think we will hand it back over to Sarah back in the room for any public comment or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen and Sarah. Starting with members of the PCAP, does anybody have any comments or questions for the folks at EGI or access to any data that they think they would like to share with EGI? If you have a data set, please let us know. They'd be happy to incorporate that into. Would you like a microphone?
Scott Corbin, Allegan County. I was just wondering, in the absence of Allegan County in that survey, if you will, there are a few other counties that were mentioned, but not Allegan.
Yeah, so the Tri-County region that we are using is based on what Southwest Michigan Planning Commission covers. That was initially where we were going with that. Carmen, did you have more to add?
No, in fact, I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear the question.
It was why Allegan County was not listed, correct? Is that what that's what I think I heard, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
There were some nods. Yep. No, this recovery initiative had identified a region of the Van Buren, Cass, and Berrien County area. And that's what was funded for this study.
Are there any additional questions within the members of the PCAP? Seeing no raised hands, we do have an opportunity for members of the public to make a comment at this time specific to the work of EGI. Does anybody have a comment or question? Mr. Keynes?
Hi, my name is Kevin Camps with Beyond Nuclear in Delta, Michigan. And my question is, in your study to come, is there any plan to look at the radioactive stigma effect of some things I brought up earlier, the lack of a comprehensive cleanup at the site? And that's if everything goes according to plan. And then the radioactive stigma effect if things don't go according to plan, if there are accidents or releases during the decommissioning, during the barging of high-level radioactive waste on Lake Michigan or other transportation modes.
Thank you for your question. Our study right now is gauging the economic impacts for the closure, and it doesn't take into consideration those questions that you have, but it can be noted and taken back to the team. But our study doesn't include an analysis for looking at the stigma of those considerations.
Thank you, Carmen. Any additional questions from members of the public here in the room or online? Okay, Julia says we have one person online. Julia, could you share the name of this person?
Yes, Ryan Campbell. You can go ahead, Brian.
Yes, my name is Brian Campbell and I'm a pro-nuclear advocate. Have you included in the study the amount of emissions that are going to increase to replace Palisades when it closes? And the amount of emission increase, because we're going to have to burn a lot of gas, which is needed in Europe right now. And that's where it should be going. Instead, we're closing this nuclear plant prematurely, which could be operated under the current license until 2031, I believe. And it just seems like the economic impact should also take into account those matters too, the emissions. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. One of the things that we are looking at is the cost of electricity in the area. We haven't finished that analysis yet. I don't believe we're addressing emissions, but what I will do is I will respond if there are some considerations within our analysis.
Thank you for that. Anybody else online, Julie?
Yes, Ryan Pickering.
Thank you. For workers who want to maintain their career in clean energy, are there considerations for folks who are forced to relocate out of the community to seek continued career in nuclear engineering?
Thank you for your question, Ryan. We are working closely with Connexus Group and Market Van Buren, and we can note your question and we can see if we can get a response to your question. For the work that I'm doing, I don't have an answer to your question right now, but we can see if we can get that answered.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else online, Julia?
That is it right now.
Okay, with that, we are going to close the public comment period past 3 times. Do we have any questions anywhere? Do we have any questions anywhere? Do we have any questions anywhere? Not seeing raising hands. We will conclude a presentation from the Economic Growth Institute. Sarah and Carmen, thank you so much for your time and being here. Julia is going to demote you two to regular attendees, and we will round out the end of this meeting here. The final thing we have on our agenda, recognizing we have very limited time left, is a general public comment period for members of the public. We would ask if members of the public are inclined to make a public comment that they keep it topical and focused on conversation that's been had today. If you wish to have a question directed to Voltaic, or you wish to bring another topic before the panel to be considered for an agenda item in the future, please send that to our email palisades@marketandbeer.org. Having said that, Is there anybody else in this room who would be inclined to make a final public comment? Mr. Camps? And Julia, just so we can be fair to everyone, when you have a moment, could you put the timer up, please? Of course, you're very respectful of that.
Thanks. Kevin Camps, beyond nuclear in West Michigan. I will try to keep it brief since I've spoken before. Just to answer some questions that were asked earlier, what is the status of the New Mexico Voltaic Consolidated Interim Storage Facility? So full disclosure, we are legal interveners against that dump, have been for many long years. Where it's at is kind of in limbo, at least for now. The NRC asked, they're called requests for additional information to Voltaic on the license application. And in my opinion, it shows how half-baked their license application is. And Voltaic has taken their sweet time to answer those questions. And our speculation is the reason that they're doing that is they would prefer that Interim Storage Partners in Texas, another consolidated interim storage facility, take the brunt of the legal fight. And so the update on that dump and why it's relevant is because those barge shipments of high-level waste on Lake Michigan that would begin to happen once a Western dump opens, that was licensed by NRC last September. And we're on appeal in federal court against both Texas, and as soon as NRC licenses Voltaic, which could happen this year still, that's the timing. We're taking them to court, and it's not just Beyond Nuclear, it's a coalition of grassroots environmental groups across the country, Don't Waste Michigan, 7 others, the Sierra Club, the biggest environmental group in the country, the state of Texas has appealed the ISP license, the state of New Mexico has appealed the Voltaic license. So these are major court battles that are underway. We face a March 18th deadline for our first initial filings in the Texas case in the DC Board of Appeals, the second highest court in the land. So watch for that news as to how these court battles go. Another thing I did want to mention, because you mentioned SNC Lavalin earlier and Comprehensive Decommissioning International. These are various names of these consortia that Voltaic is a part of. Just recently, maybe a month ago, Voltaic International and SNC Lavalin, which is a Canadian company based in Montreal, Quebec, had a divorce. So all of a sudden, this relationship that was the premier decommissioning consortium in North America doesn't exist anymore. SNC Lavalin's gone. They're not a part of it. Now it's just Voltaic International. And strangely, Voltaic International, Michael Keegan from Don't Waste Michigan said, where's our hearing on our intervention that we filed with the NRC in a short 20-day deadline we had a year ago to file our intervention? Why have we not gotten our hearing? Here we are more than a year later. One thing we raised was the bad corporate character of SNC Lavalin. They're internationally infamous. They were barred from doing business with the World Bank because of their misbehavior overseas. Well, Voltaic tried to spin it in the media saying, well, that moots their challenge. SNC Lavalin is no longer a part of this Palisades decommissioning. What they forgot to mention is we raised the same as Voltaic itself as a company. So we're still waiting for our day in court. We're still waiting for our hearing from the NRC. The update on that is that the NRC staff has recommended that Voltaic take over and not grant us a hearing. No response to us whatsoever. No response to the state Attorney General of Michigan. No response to Environmental Law and Policy Center. And they added the caveat that, well, the NRC commissioners, the directors of the agency, they could rescind our decision. They could revoke our decision. Yeah, maybe without us having a hearing yet, or maybe never. I guess we have the option of a legal challenge in federal court again against the NRC's behavior on this, but just wanted to get a couple of those questions answered. Thanks.
Thank you for that. We have time for perhaps one more question or comment. Julia, is there anybody online? I'm not seeing anybody jumping up here in the room.
Yes, Brian Campbell has another question.
Okay, Mr. Campbell, you will be our concluding thought today. Julia, please go ahead and unmute your best.
Thank you, Brian Campbell, pro-nuclear advocate. The only thing beyond nuclear is more coal and gas burning, because renewable energy is not going to do it for us. These people are extremely anti-American, and they're hurting us in the world. And I would question where they're getting their funding from. And this closure of Palisades Nuclear is very bad, very bad. It's just more deindustrialization of this country. And as me, as a veteran and as a patriotic American, I call these people out. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Julia, if you would please mute everybody online. We're going to, if you would, transition to the next slide before we wrap up here. A reminder that our next meeting will be happening April 13th, 6 to 8. The exact location is to be determined, but will be publicized as soon as we are able. The meeting will remain in the Covert South Haven area, but we're looking for a facility that hopefully will allow PCAT members to sit in shape that allows for easier conversation. Having said that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Chairman Burke.
Thank you all for attending and being patient. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And a second? Support. Everybody in support of adjourning, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, none. We are adjourned.